You're a female in a male-dominated area. What was your team like? Like, were you one of the few women who were there, or how was it divided?
Yeah, so when I initially joined as a life support fitter, there was around about 170 life support fitters across Australia. And of those 170, 14 were female. And no females
Wow.
were above the rank of corporal at that stage. So I came into a very male-dominated environment. There was, just a handful of us. My first posting was 25 members in the section and 5 females, 2 of which only worked part-time. That was really tough as well because we were always split up on different shifts or whatever. So it's not like you had female company all the time. You're always around the boys. It did take a toll on me because I was so young and I was thrust into this male-dominated environment. I didn't really know how to hold myself. I didn't know how to be feminine and female in those environments because a lot of the time I wanted to hide the fact that I was female because there was a stigma around it of weakness. That if you showed any emotion, if you showed any perceived weakness, especially as a female, it was almost seen as 10 times worse than the guys. And you always had to work twice as hard as the men to prove that you were meant to be there and that you could do the job. Later in my career, it definitely, I guess, changed a little bit. But there were still comments thrown around like, oh, you only got that because you're a female, or, you didn't actually earn your promotion. You only got it because they needed a female to be promoted and all of this kind of stuff. So it was like, it didn't matter how hard you worked for something. It was still comments made around whether you actually earned it or whether you slept your way to the top. Which is really hard when you're putting in the work and you've done everything to actually earn something, and then it's belittled in a way like that.
Yeah, you're not being seen or recognized for all the effort you're putting in.
Yeah, 100%. And then there's those other layers of being a female in defense where you get a lot of unwanted attention from men. I got a lot of, I guess, unwanted attention because I'm a conventionally attractive young female, and people would try and, I guess, hit on me. I remember doing some mundane task in the office and I had like 2 or 3 people come up to me and ask me out on dates within the span of like half an hour. And I'm like, I can't even do the lemonading without people coming up and trying to hit on me. So it's like no peace there. I also, I was a victim of sexual harassment and sexual assault while I was at the hands of men who were in the military. And that really rocked me as well. And it changed my outlook on being a female. And it really made me want to hide the fact that I was female. So, I would put on my uniform and I would hold myself differently. I would be hypermasculine. The way I spoke was more hypermasculine. I just presented myself as more of a masculine female than, I guess the person that you see now. I never wore makeup. I never did anything to draw attention to myself in that way. And I really lost my connection to my femininity and my sexuality and my sensuality of just, being a woman. And it really changed the way I viewed myself. And I've had to do a lot of work in undoing that, and undoing the wanting to hide myself, which has been really interesting, especially over the last 5 or 6 years since I'm discharged, and what I've kind of gone into post-discharge with my modelling and things like that, like just these hyper-feminist like situations.
Would it be okay if I asked you questions about the sexual assault?
Sure. Yep.
Like when that happened, did you have the chance to share that with someone or to talk about that?
To be honest, no. I actually hid it for a really long time. I didn't speak about it until, it was probably 6 years later that I first actually spoke about it to a psychologist. And I spoke about the experiences not as sexual assault, because for myself, for some reason, I guess it was my safety blanket, or how I was protecting myself from it, was my brain didn't reconcile that what had happened to me was sexual assault, because
Oh.
it was like a protective barrier for me. So when my psychologist at the time recited it back to me and said, "Do you understand that this is what this is?" I was like absolutely distraught. I guess I knew somewhere deep down that that's what had happened to me, that what this was sexual assault, was rape. I was it was almost like I'd withdrawn into like a childlike mindset of like, that no, that can't have happened to me. That happens to other people. I don't want to deal with that, so I'll just shut it away. I just won't speak about it. But it affected me. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and
Yeah.
my body reacted. I didn't know what it was, but I remember having my very first panic attack. I was triggered by something. Someone touched me, and I got really triggered by it. And I had my first panic attack, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. I hadn't figured out what panic attacks actually were. And, this is when I'm like 19, 18, 19. And it's not till, much later that I look back and go, oh, that was a panic attack. You were triggered
Mm.
by this situation, and you've had a panic attack, and that's what that was. Hindsight, I guess 2020 and all that. But yeah, it was really interesting. I didn't share my experiences with anyone. I didn't report anything like that. So, for me, it's been quite recent that I've actually started diving into that trauma and working through it, and really, I guess, processing what had happened.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, because that is something really vulnerable to say. And as you were saying that, I was also thinking that because you were in an environment where there was not really a way out, maybe keeping it out of your mind was the way to keep going with the tasks at hand. Because how d like, I can imagine that it felt very unsafe to then still be with the same people every day. How did that affect, like, the next years you spent in the Air Force?
I definitely closed myself off, really, to forming connections, especially with the men in my sections. I really put up like this wall, and I wouldn't associate with them outside of work. And if I did, it was really, I guess, minimal. I almost I was the bitch. Let's put it that way. I was the bitch. I wouldn't be friends with anyone. I wouldn't joke with anyone. I really closed myself up and shut myself down to a lot of people who were in my vicinity. There was a few guys who I guess slipped through, who showed me that I could trust them. We built that trust and that mutual respect, and I definitely have really close friendships with men throughout my defense career. But it was definitely like I almost ostracized myself to protect
Mm,
myself, a way of protecting myself.
yeah.
And yeah, that really did affect a lot of, I guess, my relationships, my working relationships as well, because, if I'm got my guard up constantly, I'm constantly defensive, I'm constantly reactive, because, I'm on guard, and I'm ready. I'm basically in fight or flight mode
Yeah.
constantly at work. You can imagine how that would affect working relationships.
Yeah.
You can't have working relationships if someone's always ready to fight.